We have formed a quorum. Please invite the guests to come in. Welcome, Secretary for Home Affairs. Is Tanya coming? Yes.
OK 得。好，歡迎局長同你班同事。
Welcome, Secretary and your colleagues. We are on report number 68, Chapter 4. Mr. Ho is the lead member for this session. Maybe I should ask the Director of Audit to introduce Chapter 4. Before I invite the Secretary for Home Affairs to speak. Over to you, Director. Sorry. Let me say this. Who has to declare interest? Well, I'm a member of the Democratic Party, and my party has many district councillors in the North District. I'm from DAB, and our party members may be invited to act as consultants or advisors to different district organizations. There are just too many to be comprehensive in listing them out. Director, this is Chapter 4 of report number 68, entitled Provision of District Council Funds for Community Involvement Projects. It comes in 4 parts. First, Part 1, introduction on the background of the audit, and the community involvement projects make up of 2 parts, projects of DCs and projects of LCSD. This is an important part of community building for the promotion of the well-being in 18 districts. The Home Affairs Department allocates funds to the district councils in carrying out such CI projects. In 2015, the allocation was $360 million. From 2016-2018, the funding has been increased annually to $460 million. Both government departments and NGOs can apply to the district councils for funding support in order to implement CI projects. In 2015, there were 38,000 such projects involving 19 million participants. The second part is on allocation and use of district council funds for CI projects. According to the existing mechanism, the HAD would allocate funds to district councils based on past allocations or by dividing the funds equally to all, and then an additional amount based on the socio-economic factors to different district councils. We have found out that in allocating funds for CI projects, the HAD has not taken into account the changes in recent years in relation to these factors. We propose that the HAD review the allocation method so as to appropriately allocate the funds to the district councils. We've also analyzed the funding for community DC funded projects. There are more culture and arts and leisure and sports activities compared with other activities such as civic education. As also, the number of activities for the targeted groups or social strata is low in number, and the number of participants is on the low side. We hope the HAD would analyze the situation with individual DC so that to make sure that the allocation will be most appropriate for district needs. Part 3 is on the management of conflict of interest. It is common that the district councillors involved in these CIP would have some connections, and in managing the conflict of interest, DC would ask district councillors to register, to do the first tier declaration, for example, to make declaration before the meeting, and also to disclose register personal interests such as directorship, paid directorship, and other disclosable benefits. And also there should be a second tier of declaration of interest when they are involved in handling allocation applications in the district council meetings. We have noted that there is no clear definition of other disclosable benefits. Out of the 128 items which require second tier declaration, 122, such as chairmanship or presidency of certain applicant organizations, they have not declared the same interest in under first tier. We propose that the HAT should come up with guidelines for DCs so that they can disclose other disclosable interests. We have noted that out of the 129 declarations, 73 have not been ruled to be in line with the standing orders of district councils, so that the relevant district councillors should go to the public gallery or should excuse themselves. We propose that the HAD should remind district councils to record the rulings on declaration of interest, and such rulings should be recorded. There are committees and working groups under district councils to implement to fulfill their functions. We know that there are certain procedures regulating the management of conflict of interest, but such procedure is not applicable to the meetings of working groups. We propose that the HAT should ensure that there is a proper procedure for managing conflict of interest, in that the conflict of interest procedure for DCs should apply to working groups in the same way. Part 4, implementation of community involvement projects. In line with usual practice, these co-organizers of NGOs are usually invited after a screening process so that they can become partners of DCs. But we note that for some partners to DCs, they are nominated by the district councillors. Such an arrangement certainly can be improved. We propose that the HAD should come up with guidelines on this screening or selection of cooperation partners for district councils to follow, and there should be an assessment system on the part of the DCs in accordance of the HAD guidelines, so as to assess the effectiveness of CI projects. We note that some district councils have not adopted any assessment system, and there are no standards on the assessment criteria. We propose that the HAD should take action to ensure that all district councils come up with an assessment system, and also to come up with assessment criteria so as to implement the system faithfully. Our views and suggestions have been agreed to by the departments concerned. We thank all the government colleagues for their assistance and cooperation during the audit process. Thank you, Chairman. Any declaration from you, Mr. Siu? Well, I'm a district councillor. I'm from the Liberal Party. And I have to declare that there are members of the BPA who are district councillors. Before I invite the Secretary to speak, I would like to say that this meeting is resumed today. And in May and the 6th, on the 31st of May and the 6th of June, we wrote to the Secretary to raise a number of questions. We have got some replies in which can be found in Gen 1 and Gen 2. So over to the Secretary for a general response before I open the floor for members to raise questions. Chairman, we are grateful for the Audit Commission for carrying out this value for money audit in respect of community involvement projects, and for their suggestions. We would tie in with the PAC in the hearing on this subject. We generally agree with the recommendations of the Audit Commission, and we have already started work to improve the fund allocation arrangement and declaration of interest system, and we have also elaborate on the follow-up action that we have taken in our written response to PAC. In all along, the HAB has been setting relevant rules on the prevention of conflict of interest in line with the two-tier system which was set up with the assistance of ICAC, and this is implemented through the standing orders of district councils. All district councillors have to make declaration of interest in accordance with standing orders, and there is the first tier declaration will be disclosed on the website of the district council. Mainly, this is about pecuniary interest. If there are changes to the benefits, the district councillor must make these necessary amendments within 14 days. The second tier is about the pecuniary or other interest relationship in relation to the tendering, quotation of DC fund allocations. If the district councillors are associated with the beneficiary of such applications or fund allocations, and the district council is required to make a declaration ASAP to the district council and before the involvement of any discussion. And on the other hand, under the funding guidelines for the utilizing DC funds, there's a second-tier declaration which stipulates that a district councillor should make a declaration for any actual, potential, or apparent conflict of interest, so as to avoid, and district councillors to avoid any commercial dealing with individuals and organizations which have been allocated DC funds for activities.
Now, this two-tier system has been in operation for a long time. The first tier is quite comprehensive. There are 8 categories, and most members are familiar with these procedures, and we, from time to time, review the district council standing orders, and when we do the review, we will consult the ICAC. And in 2015, we reviewed the declaration of interest declaration system, and we consulted and we took it into account the electrical personal declaration of interest requirements, and we updated the declaration registration form, and it's uploaded to the district council website for the public's perusal. And considering the audit reports recommendations, we have further improved the system, and that includes the district, the HA Home Affairs Department has consulted the ICAC regarding the first tier of declaration of interest, the other declarable interests. We sought the guidance from the IC, and we hope that this guideline can help the DC members can accurately declare at the first tier, and if the members when they are serving in the implementation of the CIPs, that would be considered declarable interest. As for the second tier of declaration interest, we ask that the DCs, when they circulate the documents, they must remind the DC members to declare their interest and to remind the chairman that he must make the rulings and to record the rulings in the minutes. And the minutes will be uploaded to the website. We have reminded DCs and the committees, secretariats, that the secretariats will only circulate the documents in emergency cases or when it cannot be further postponed. And the HAD has jointly worked with the secretariats of the various DCs to set up the best practices for handling the declaration of interest. And the manual for the use of DC funds has also been updated.
我哋嘅記錄。
Well, the secretary's speeches are out 8, stroke Gen 4. Mr. Ho is the member responsible for this particular chapter, so he will ask questions first before other members. Thank you, Secretary. As David has said, there are 3 parts. First of all, the declaration of interest for allocation of funds, whether the objectives can be achieved. As the chairman said, this meeting was delayed, was postponed for a few months. I understand the Secretary has done quite a lot in response to this report. Maybe you can tell us what you have actually implemented. Whether what you do is effective depends on whether you can find out the problems. Today we are on a fact-finding mission because we don't want to spend money on projects which are not effective. On 1.7, the government allocated the funds originally given to LCST to DC. And it's increased to about $340 million so as to implement art and leisure. And from 2015 to 2019, it will be another increase of $20.8 million. So altogether, it will be $361 million. So you are going to spend more money on art and cultural activities. Are these activities effective in achieving the objectives? There must be a reason for allocating more funds for art and cultural activities. And under Table 1, 99.9% of the funds was spent every year, but the number of activities has dropped, and the number of participants has also dropped. So there are fewer and fewer participants, and there have been fewer and fewer projects. What do you say about this trend, and what kind of remedial action are you going to take? 2 questions. First, why allocate more funds for the cultural and leisure and cultural and sports activities? But people in the district would like to have more cultural and arts and sports activities. There's a great demand. Therefore, the government has provided a higher level of funding so that more people in the various districts can appreciate art and culture, and also to enable more young people to participate in sports activities. You may ask why, on the one hand, we are giving them a bigger provision, but the number of participants has dropped. We'll look at some of the projects for the cultural-related activities. sometimes more resources are required than ordinary activities such as a carnival. Say if it's a big performance, say to commensurate the 20th anniversary of SAR the establishment.
They had a large-scale performance in Sha Tin, and it's a good activity, and it takes a lot of resources, but I said increase the number of spectators, not necessarily. And then in some districts, they organize some activities, such as some in-depth talks. It may not attract a large audience, but perhaps the quality has increased. So the figures seems to have dropped, but looking at the DCs, it has met the district's needs in deciding what activities to engage in. So basically, we support such leisure, cultural, and sports activities. Now, as for Table 4, now of the categories for which DC applies for funds, arts and cultural, leisure and sports, and then thirdly, festivities. Now, the Audit Commission said that one reason why we have these activities is we want to promote social harmony, and we are also concerned about the minorities. Now, but in Table 5, for arrivals from the mainland, ethnic minorities, and females, and they are only 0.1% and 0.2%. Now, why has this developed? It said that the Home Affairs, the district officers haven't done enough in publicity and promotion. What have you done? The Secretary? Now, regarding females, there are in fact 3 categories. Please go from table to table. Now you are answering with regard to Table 5. Yes, Table 5. I can ask the director to respond, but these figures may be local residents are a high percentage, and there would be both males and females. So that is rather more general. Now, so it doesn't necessarily mean that females don't participate so much. For instance, you have a carnival, there are certain to be both males and females and different types of people. And in 2.5, now, activities targeting certain groups, maybe there are fewer applications in this category. Now, if you leave things entirely up to the district council, they would take the activities which more people participate in, and they wouldn't choose the ones for ethnic minorities. Now, did you take note of this problem prior to the audit report? And what are you going to do? Now, from the government's perspective, if there are activities which we want to do more, like ethnic minorities oriented activities. Now, the HAD has plenty of activities serving these groups. It's not necessarily under the DCs, but we respect the DCs to set their own priorities. So it's at 2 levels. The government departments may engage in certain efforts. Now, there are special circumstances. Now, with regard to policies towards females, ethnic minorities, and new arrivals. Now, in Table 5, what is shown is that your work doesn't reflect the policies of the government. You say you respect the DCs, yet the DCs have to work within the scope of those policies. Chairman, my first question was that they increased the funding for especially cultural, leisure, and cultural activities. Now, so the government should have more say. It has a role. It shouldn't leave it entirely to the DCs. Now, the report says 0.1, 0.1, and 0.2. Or is it that we leave these activities to the Youth Commission or to other organizations under the HAD? I can pass Mr. Ho's views to the district councils to see whether there can be strengthening of with regard to these activities. In Table 7, it says that 7 DCs used money for cultural activities in other purposes, and 30% was not used in art and cultural activities, yet the funding was for art and cultural activities. Now, in the year 2013-14, you added $20-odd million for art and cultural activities, and yet the money was not actually used for that purpose. Now, you use the money for some other purpose, and then you come and say you want more. So what have you done in this regard? Chairman, we understand the situation. Now, in some cases, the funds were not used up completely, the money for art and cultural activities. Now, in the budgets for these activities, now the sums were targeted but not reached in the process of implementation. So there's some money left, and then they thought they would want to use the money left for other activities. But we agreed that the money for art and cultural activities should be entirely used for those purposes. But in the workings of the DCs, sometimes when they didn't use up the money, they tend to adopt this practice. So we are going to talk to the DCs. Maybe they should budget more when, even if some activities couldn't have all the money spent, the money targeted for art and cultural activities would still be used up. Now, the question is, we pay the money for art and cultural activities, and when you can't spend the money for those purposes, you should return the money to the government. And you shouldn't just say, oh, I couldn't use it up for art and cultural activities, I use it for other purposes, I organize a seminar for ethnic minorities, for instance. Now, I think that's unreasonable. Now, was it the district office or is it that the DC that made this decision? Secretary, now, after the money is applied for and then there's money left, the DC spends the money as it sees fit. So this is a governance problem. Now, looking forward, do you think you will be aware of such activities? Mr. Ho, I believe they are aware, but who decides that the money left over is used for other purposes? Now, is there a shortfall in the governance mechanism? I'd like the director to respond. Now, firstly, in the planning process, when funds are set aside for different projects, the DC specified that the funds for arts and culture activities should be used for those purposes. However, sometimes, say, when it rains, the activity was cancelled, the money was not used, so there is a surplus, and according to the funding regulations, now the funds would have to be used or it would be lost. So in those cases, the money was used in other activities. Maybe there are art and cultural elements, but they may not be entirely art and cultural activities. Now, if we follow the code absolutely, then the money should not be used for other purposes. So we propose that when they budget in the future, they should allow for contingency. So they should allot a little bit more. Now, but that's a problem in itself too, because when all the activities could go ahead, then they would go beyond their budget. They would overspend. So we try to strike a balance. We strongly suggest that the DCs, when they arrange for the funds, they try to use the money for art and cultural activities. Now, even if the money cannot be spent, they should be spent on certain segments in other activities which have a high, which are art and cultural in nature. This way, there would be greater stability. This is proposed to all DCs, and however, it's difficult to be exact in. So we will closely monitor. Now, I understand that the DCs may not excel in these accounting or clerical activities. Now, when you know that your partner is not good at this, then you should provide assistance. Suppose because of poor weather you have to cancel the activity and use the money somewhere else, there should be a mechanism for the transfer of funds. Now, if you require flexibility, then the funds should not be specified for a certain use. It's better to cancel it. So you should have a flexible mechanism. Now, you were not very clear. You just said you try to, as much as possible, use it in that other activity. Now, this is where the problem arises. You gave them the discretion, then the problem comes to the PAC. Now, if you don't have a good mechanism, you come back to the PAC again for the same reason. Now, you have to amend the mechanism. In your guidelines, you must retain power of control. It's a governance issue. This way you would offer flexibility and you know what they're doing, because it's all public funds. Now, you should provide them with guidelines, you should give them flexibility, but it should all be in a mechanism. Now, they don't have a mechanism, that's the problem. So reminding is not enough. Now, you should maintain flexibility. Now, so I will end my questions here. It's about 20 minutes. Mr. Lam. Now, before Mr. Lam speaks, Tanya, do you need to declare interest? I declare that I'm party of the Civic Party, and some members of the party probably made use of these funds. Okay. Mr. Lam? I'd like to follow up on the questions by Mr. Lam. There are 10 DCs which use funds for art and cultural activities for other purposes. Now, the funding is very clear. They are for specified uses. Now, the Secretary and the Director explained that perhaps because some activities didn't materialize, so some money was left and used elsewhere, and the director said that those activities have art and cultural elements. Now, can the director explain of all these activities, how many of them have art and cultural elements, and what art and cultural elements are there? Now, Mr. Director, if you are not sure, you can go back and study the matter. Now, I don't want you to say something which turns out to be untrue. So we should be fair. So where money is overspent or where money is spent in other activities, on other activities, how much are there? How much? Do you have those figures? Now, we do discuss with the DCs and analyze certain projects. Now, we don't have the figures on what is the proportion of the art and cultural element in each activity. We have to go back and study. Now, when in certain cases, when there's surplus on the funding for art and cultural activities, then for those then those monies would be spent on other activities that have not yet taken place, and they do add some art and cultural elements, but they may not fully meet with the principles on the use of the money. So we will go back and look at those cases where the money was not used. Now, Director said that the money was used on other activities and art and cultural elements were added. So what elements were added? Was it a carnival? Was it exhibition? Or even soccer? You can call it culture, right? We know that certain cultural projects have money left. It's not because money has not been allocated at the outset. Now, for instance, in 1516, there was a calligraphy competition that was cancelled due to the venue issue, so there was money left. So for some DCs, when the item was cancelled due to venue problem, they used the money for other purposes. For instance, on carnivals, and they would add some performances. So the money, the use of the money would be decided by the DC. Now, well, there must be art and cultural element. Perhaps there is dance, right? Now, the question is very clear. Now, when the money is used on other activities, you said that those activities have art and cultural elements. So maybe you can gather some information on that. Maybe you don't have the information offhand. Now, you have to be accountable for the veracity of the facts. Perhaps she can provide a table on the activities where the surplus money was used and what's the name of the activity and what cultural and art elements are there.
Also,
處長，
Mr. Lam, please continue. Oh, I'm sorry. I want to explain that they don't just allocate amount of fund. Let's say you have to approve $100, but maybe there would be a budget of $120. Sometimes there may be overcommitment or the budget is not sufficient. So there may be money left over. For some projects, they may go over budget. So they may use a part of the money left behind for that. Well, we understand, Director. Mr. Ho has also asked questions as to what arts and cultural events the money has been used on. We are not asking whether the money is used in a worthwhile manner. We understand. We have read all the reports and we have read all the responses. You need to come up with a clear response because under 73 of the Basic Law, we do have to monitor the government. So if you don't know the answer, that's all right. We will follow up later on, and you can go back and find a clear answer. Is this your first time here, Director? You have to understand that we want clear answers to all the questions. Chairman, yes, this is a very good supplement. You should look back to the audit report A to J. There's a listed percentage of how much money has not been used on these arts and cultural activities. So you can use the data used by the Audit Commission as to where you have gone over a budget and where you have not used all the money. I want to also ask the Director. We see that money is to be very clearly used on arts and cultural activities, but it seems that many of the projects are not in this area. I know that the DCs get to pick where the money is to be used, but there are HAB colleagues taking up the role of secretary at the DC. Have the secretaries fulfill their functions in informing the DCs that the money should be used for arts and cultural activities. Have the secretaries tried to stop the funds for those activities? Well, every year when we allocate the funds, the plan was for designated funds is on designated projects, but when the funds are realized or when the funds are used, it may not be exactly the case. That is what I have tried to explain earlier. So when they look at the applications, they approve it in relation to the designated activities. Well, I'm not asking about the original plan. I want to know when there is money left and when some of the activities cannot go ahead, there is extra money left. So would the secretary of the DC stand out and say, "Oh, Chairman, I'm sorry, the fund is for designated use. You should not use it for any other purposes. Why don't you come up with arts and cultural activities? Don't tell me what your original plan is. You have to tell me what ultimately was done." Director, well, I understand your question. So maybe you didn't monitor the situation, and therefore we can see what the situation on table 7. If you didn't do that before, we understand. So as to how, well, I don't think we should just go and argue about it because the percentages are already out. Mr. Lam, thank you, Chairman. I just want to listen to how the Director responds to this question, because the colleagues do have the responsibility to make sure that public funds are used properly. If you don't know, just say you don't know the answer. Or if you know, you should at least tell me that you have tried to stop the funds from being used in or for any other purposes. Or you can tell us that the DCs did not listen to the HAB colleagues. Or is it the case that the HAB colleagues did not remind the DCs that the funds have a designated use? We are here to monitor the government. We cannot directly monitor the district councils. So the HAD plays a huge role in monitoring the DCs. Director, yes, we have the responsibility to monitor home affairs. Well, I'm not saying that we don't have the responsibility. I'm saying that, we have our plans, but sometimes, plans change in the end. Well, yes, we all know that, that this is exactly the reason why Table 7 came into place. From these HAD records. Mr. Lam's question is whether any colleague from the HAB remind the DCs that the funds should not be used for any other purposes. So maybe we should ask the director to go back to review whether their colleagues have reminded the DCs on the proper use of the funds. This is a very clear question. I'll let Mr. Lam ask again. Well, it's been a few months, since the audit report came out, and this is one of the major issues. Director or secretary, you as an accountable officer, have you tried to look into the matter? The director agrees that the HAD has the responsibility to monitor the DCs. So why haven't you done so? Or you can tell me that I am wrong, that they have tried to stop it, but then the chairman of the DCs did not listen. Well, if that's the case, did they any report to the HAD? Well, I think you have to explain very clearly what the Secretariat has done, whether they have really achieved their functions in trying to stop these funds for being used in other manners. Because this is a very serious issue. I mean, if the Secretariat has tried to remind the DCs, yet the DCs or the chair of the DCs do not listen, then it's a very serious issue that we really need to follow up. I think you have to come up with more detailed explanations. Secretary, well, we will go back and review. The percentage here is very clear. Yes, you can see from Table 7 all the figures. Have you tried to talk to the DCs about them? If you say no, that's all right. This is already in the past. We are going to look forward. Chairman, in so many of the activities listed out in Table 7 that are not related to arts and cultural elements, would the district councillors actually have an interest with the groups who are arranging for these activities? We don't have this information. So can you go back and look for such information? We will try to look for the information. Because the funds cannot be clearly defined. We look at the fund in a lump sum. Director of Audit, have you read any reports on whether the Secretariat has reminded the DCs on the proper use of funds? Chairman, we base our report on the minutes of the meeting. Perhaps I can defer to my colleague. Thank you, Chairman. We don't see from the minutes that this has been mentioned. When the funds are approved for a certain a project, they would look at the criteria. The Secretariat may not clearly understand how much money has already been used. They may not have such information. It's not on how much they have spent, it's how much money is left, and then they use the remaining amount to spend on other activities. Mr. Lam. I'd like to conclude my thoughts. No, this can be a very serious problem. I'm inclined to believe in you that some activities due to unexpected circumstances could not be carried out, but that could become a loophole because they may want to arrange for a certain activity, yet they do not meet the criteria, so they use the money to try to give it to their own friends to use in another activity. We just want to make sure that there is no abuse of government funding. So this is my view. Perhaps you could consider it. I'd like to ask another question on 3.13. Let me quote a bit. I'm sorry. We are still on 2 right now. We can go to part 3 later on. All right. So I would finish up with part 2. Or if there is remaining amount, I think you should at least put up a waiting list. Then you can approve 10 activities or 10 events, and if some fall out, then you can use number 11 or 12 on the waiting list. And director, do not continue to repeat yourself, saying that if A money is not used, then you can transfer it to event B. Well, I understand, but the thing is we have to look at the percentages right now. You should I think, Director of Audit, perhaps you could give us with the information, right? Well, yes, I think they know all the information already. I do not have any other questions, Chairman. Mr. Shiu. Thank you, Chairman. So of the 18 DCs, each DC they're not consistent in their meetings. Well, I myself is a district councillor, and we hold meetings at different times. It seems that we are not very consistent in our standing orders. Well, the district councils can all formulate their own standing order. So this is what they do. They differ in standing orders, but the HAD will give them guidelines on good practices, hoping that they would follow. But then it will be up to the district council to draw up their own standing orders. Mr. Shiu, I think this is in relation to part 3. Can we first put our attention to part 2 first? Oh, I didn't realize that it is in part 3. I just want to share my views. Oh yes, in LegCo we do have our own orders, or even though there are 18 different districts. I think a district council should work in a similar model. I'm not saying who is right, who is wrong, or even in your government departments, even if your DO go work in a different department, you would still follow the same rules or regulations. I want to 3.16. Oh, 3.16 is in part 3. So we are just focusing. All right, before part 3, I want to ask about your policy. What are the guidelines for district councils, or what is a guideline under your HAD? Perhaps you can tell us about that later when we move on to part 3. All right, okay, if we're focusing on part 2, can I share some other views? Well, I'm still on 2. Well, other colleagues have asked about the arrangements of funds. Well, this is my 10th year as a district councillor. If I remember, when you apply for funding, then a lot of funding is used on the ethnic minorities. And for some of the major ethnic minority groups, then they would apply for funding every year. And I think many members in the district council already are part of the group. Well, then if I see so many former district councillors' names on their member list, and of course, I would also join. Every year, these NGOs would organize a few major events, and they need a large amount of money. So we know that every year we would need to earmark some funds for these large groups. But for this time, I think you have mentioned, especially elderly, young people. I don't think I have heard about this at the district council, that certain funds need to be used for women, certain used for ethnic minorities. If these people want to apply for funding, I think that of course it would be supported by the DC. But we do not have the guidelines that 10% should be for women, 15% for ethnic minorities, etc. We do not have the idea, because we focus mainly on maybe recreational activities, so that there would be more entertainment for the general public, especially for the elderly. I think district councillors put a lot of attention on the elderly. When they try to organize any tour groups, or maybe for performances, then the elderly would usually attend, and they would bring their young grandchildren. But I'm really do not agree that certain percentage should be left for ethnic minorities or for women. Oh, thank you. Well, thank you for sharing your 10 years experience. Mr. Lam has also raised this point that some groups, if they could not apply for funding, then they would actually instead try to allocate the funds to other groups or other groups who are friends of them. So the director has explained that there's a reason why some money has been used for other purposes. So in future you have to consider how you can to better write a report. I keep on saying that we have to look for the way forward. We can't change history, so the only way is to go forward right now.
We look at this from a governance perspective, from the perspective of value for money. Secretary, I want to clarify a point here. I've listened to Mr. Siu saying that there's an indicator that a certain percentage for women, a certain percentage for young people. No, there's no such ratios. It's just this is done now for analysis only. As I've said, there's no such ratios specified by the district council. So unless you stipulate that we should have 20% for women or 10% for ethnic minorities, otherwise they would just go for the the general public. I understand that there's a total sum for such applications, for such activities for each district council, but of course the population is different, district from district, but you're not able to track the changes closely. So sometimes they get more than what the population warrants, and sometimes less. Director, you just want to promote well-being, right? On the types of activity to be funded, the district council will certainly organize their own meetings to make such decisions. And different district organizations would submit applications. It's not that the DC would invite certain organizations to submit applications. You just invite them to submit applications. Any organizations can submit their applications. But we are now talking about the activities selected by the district council for the purpose of funding. I believe in so doing, the DC would look at the local needs. For example, if they have a big elderly population, they will allocate more to such activities. But as Mr. Ho has said, there are demographic changes. Actually, with the population reduced, you're spending 17% more on them. So there's a problem with what you have said. Let me clarify. Mr. Ho asked how the HAD allocates the $460 million to the districts, to the district councils. One of the factors is the population of the district concerned, but when the district council allocates funds, that would be determined in accordance with the application received. They will have regard to the activities to be organized this year, to be offered this year, and what they offered in the previous year. They will look at the district needs in doing this. Mr. Siu, let me follow up this point. You may think that sometimes you spend more money on the activities, on the projects with a smaller population. Well, of course, the sums are correct. 10 years ago, there were fewer NGOs. And now there are different NGOs, political parties organizing a variety of activities. And if we are concerned whether there will be any whether there will be sufficient applicants, we will try to ask them to submit applications. There are more organizers, and you should not just look at the population figure. Is it going to be a short-term one for a week, or is it going to serve a higher purpose? Oh yes. But we have to look at the report. Well, yes, I'm also a district councillor. And I want to make a point in response to the Bureau's reply. And that is the funds allocated differ from year to year. But the district councils are supposed to be the same, and they should also enjoy equal rights. They should be entitled to equal allocations, because you should base on the population of the district. But of course, you say that you have the fire dragon for the Mid-Autumn Festival in Taihang, and that will require extra allocation. For example, and also another example would be a special festivity for Tam Kong Temple. So you should make it simple and easy to understand. I was making the point that the standing orders of different district councils are not the same. They should be the same. Of course, not many district councillors will run in another district in subsequent terms. Well, yes, we can have a discussion after the public hearing of our meeting. It's in 2.4, paragraph 2.4. You have make a very good point. Mr. Ho, to follow up with the points made by Mr. Siu, a population is one of the factors in deciding allocations. And in some districts, they are bigger. Travel is more expensive, but the population is smaller. Or maybe it has a big country park. So you look at these factors, 4 factors, and then you make adjustments. And what is the weighting of the 4 factors? Because a population growth may impose a lot of pressure on the district. This report is from the Audit Commission. I would like to seek their views on Table 7, Table 4, arts and culture, leisure, and non-arts and culture. That would a lot would depend on the nature identified in the process. If a soccer match is, of course, a sports activity, but what about a match to celebrate a festival? So you must explain. If I have an activity to celebrate the National Day, you have already put your question. Shall we have an answer from the Secretary? Paul, do you like to declare any interest? Are you from District Council? Sorry, I had to attend another meeting. Well, I'm a district councillor, although I have never submitted any application for funding support. We have to do our declaration of interest to the fullest extent possible. Regarding the allocation and principles of allocation, we have reviewed the arrangement after the audit report was published. In the past, we did not update the population figures and also the socio-economic factors. We do not change the funding level every year. We would like to have some stability for the CI projects. In the past, a big part of the allocation will be based on past allocations, and then we would only reallocate the additional parts, if any, if there's a bigger allocation for the year. And now we have revised the system. More weighting will be given to the factors of population, the size of the district, and the socio-economic situation in sharing the new funds. And a smaller part will be based on past allocation levels so as to achieve some stability. Some 40% will be allocated based on historical allocation levels, and then 60% are based on the factors concerned. So at this beginning of each term of DC, we would review and revise the allocation arrangement, or when there are new funds to be allocated, we will do it again. This is what we have done to improve the allocation system. Can you give us a paper on that? Yes. We can provide in writing more details on the funding and allocation arrangement. Yes. Let's move on to the second question. Categorization of the activities under the district council. Different secretariats of district councils would look at the computer system, the district database, and then they categorize different activities. So basically, categorization is a decision made by our staff in the districts. For example, if it's a soccer match, maybe I didn't make myself very clear. At first, the district council would say that this is used on arts and culture. But when the information is inputted into the computer, they may say this is culture activity. It's not a really reallocation. Maybe we are still talking about the same project, the same activity, but it's a question of the one manually categorizing the activity. Well, that's not what we feel when we read the report. To save time, you should have explained this when they gave you this report. If you agree with them and did not offer any explanation, it's not good. You should tell them what you have just told us. When you are given the draft audit report, you should offer these explanations clearly. I think they have been very fair. They would give you everything they have got. And then we'll understand why we have such a problem. Well, of course, the Audit Commission would publish the report in accordance with the information given to you. Activity may be organized to mark the National Day, but it can also be a sports activity. Have you provide training to the secretariat? I'm not a district councillor. I hope, and I certainly would like to see that after a new term of the district council, and after new councillors are elected, have you explained to the district councillors what the funds are for? If the district councillors do not know that such funds can be used to serve the ethnic minorities, that they may not do it, you should tell them that there are such options, and they can make their choices. Thank you, Mr. Ho. Yes, there is certainly room to improve the mechanism. In the light of the audit report for 2016 and 17, we have analyzed how funds are allocated. 72% this year has been used on arts and culture, and another part of the total allocations are used on projects to serve the elderly and ethnic minorities. We would issue guidelines to the district council secretariat on how to categorize the activities and projects, so that at the time of allocation they would already know what the right category should be for a certain project, instead of waiting until the input is done into the computer. Yes, the two members have to left by 4:30 p.m. So maybe we can proceed to part 3. Maybe I can say a few words about, say 10 minutes for chapter 3. I have some questions for chapter 2. The first question is categorization. What is an arts and cultural activity? If we say it's a martial art, can you say this is also arts and culture, or is it really leisure and sports? We have to be careful about how we categorize this. There are local residents listed out, but of course there are women, young people, and ethnic minorities. So how do you tell them apart? I'm sorry that I had to attend another meeting next door, so I have come after asking my first question there. Under 2.9, in 2015-2016, we have seen a decrease in the number of participants, and the number of participants and number of projects have been on the decrease, but the funding went up. It said it will be kept under review. The number of projects, the number of participants, vis-a-vis the expenditure, will be looked into so as to improve the performance measurement. I would like to know the present thinking on how to assess the utilization of funds in the light of the number of projects and the number of participants. I think you have answered this in response to Mr. Ho's question. We have no indicator, the district councils do not have any target number of projects or target number of participants. Such would depend on the applications received. We understand that the number of projects decreased, or the number of projects may increase, the number of participants may decrease. The numbers may have to do with the quality. Well, the numbers both decrease. The number of projects and the number of participants both decrease. And the funding may have to do with price levels. We have not changed the funding levels over the past years. And in the same period, inflation was 16%. And if we look at the per capita expenditure, it increased. So apart from the nature of the projects in question, we have to look at the scale of the project. The scale may be smaller, but the expenditure may still increase. Table 4, we have a CI project table and breakdown figures. You talk about higher quality of the projects. Where can we find the information? How is this reflected?
For instance, louder please. Now in 2.12 you can see this. For instance, recreational and sports activities, in most of the activities the costs have risen. For training, the coaches cost more, and the recreational activities organized by DCs are of a greater variety, such as BMX. They cost more. Now, she talked about cost, but not the quality. Now, it's difficult to say which cultural activities are of higher quality. So, all activities are of good quality. So you can just say that the projects are more diversified. There are smaller audiences. Now, in Table 3, 2011 to 2015, now it goes from $12 to $17 per person. So she couldn't answer on quality. Now, the costs are higher, the nature is more diversified, but does that mean higher quality? Now, we hope that the DC activities are of higher quality. Now, we are not trying to divide people into different grades, but some activities are more general, some are more sophisticated for smaller audience, but I don't know how you can measure the quality. Now, the drama shows you are certainly of good quality. Now, I will try my best to join those performances again. Now, quality is an important indicator. Now, in paragraph 2.9, it says that for now, you look at the number of projects and the size of the audience. So these are two important performance indicators. And 2.14, it says that the HAD and the LCSD will verify the accuracy of the project statistics. Now, I'd like to ask, why do you need to verify the accuracy? Because the figures have been reported to the controlling officer. Does that mean there was no verifying of accuracy before the controlling officer issues the report? Now, apart from the number of projects and the size of the audience, now will there be questionnaires on how interested people are? Because you might join the carnival, but you might want other things to be done. Now, you can have new projects in relation to women and minorities. Now, in 2.14, after we verify, along with the LCSD, we find that there is a discrepancy in the statistics. It's mainly in the categorization. The DC staff determine the categories, and also there is timing discrepancy compared to the LCSD figures. So we agree that there is discrepancy, and we are now we have now decided, along with the LCSD, that we will adopt a common standard and a common time frame. So when we gather the statistics for all 18 districts, we will adopt a uniform standard to ensure that the statistics are accuracy. Director of LCSD, we thank you for coming. Do you need to supplement? Now on the statistics, we will work with the HAD and the district officers to ensure that the statistics in definition and interpretation and accuracy will be improved. Now, on the design of activities to meet the district's needs, now the activities organized by the LCSD are about 1/3 of the CI projects, and 90% are recreational and sports in nature. Now, every year we have a proposal to the DCs on recreational and sports activities, and we analyze in detail the population of the district, the various age groups, and how popular past activities were, for instance, like soccer, and new venue facilities, for instance, velodromes, where we try to make use of the facilities to design certain activities. So when we propose the activities for the LCSD, for the district councils to allocate funds for, we will take into account the distinctive characteristics of the district and its population and so on. And apart looking at cost effectiveness, we'll look at the quality, the diversification, and the meeting of the district's needs. Now, on the and also the number of participants, the categories of activities, we will try to move ahead with time. Now, Ms. Tanya Chen mentioned quality and diversification of art and cultural activities. Now, take LCSD for example. Every time we have organized an activity, the frontline staff of each district would analyze the feedback to see if the popular activity has been popular and should be organized in the following year, how many people applied, and so on. Now, some statistics show that the unit cost has increased, and in paragraph 2.12 we mention, or in 2.13 we mention, that the unit cost is often affected by the type of activity. For instance, a large carnival, there would be many participants, including the audience. Now, if there are some in-depth training classes which last several months, then the unit cost would increase. So when we discuss with the Audit Commission or the DCs, it's difficult to use one single number to quantify whether the activity meets the needs of the district, because activities do differ. For instance, training classes, indoor bicycling, now that would differ from activities where the venue requirements are not so stringent. Now, we try to make the best use of facilities in each district. Tanya? We are ready to go into 3. I have only 2 questions. Now, you said the director said that the gathering of statistics would be improved. but the problem has arisen. Now, according to, will you provide the figures afresh? Will you update the figures so that we have the comparable figures based on the new standard? Now, this is following up on 2.14, so please provide us with a reply. They will rework the previous figures, and that will apply also to 2.14. They will use the new system to rework the old figures. Mr. Ho, you can go into 3. The Secretary, can you tell us about the guidelines for the 18 districts are those guidelines just for guidance purpose and do not have to be adhered to? Now, the Audit Commission pointed out several aspects. Firstly, some DC members, when they declare interest at the first tier, now those are pecuniary interests, and they would have been declared. And then there are non-pecuniary interests. Some DC members made the declaration, but others didn't. Now, when they actually discuss certain items, then a member discovers that he has a conflict of interest, and he makes a declaration there and then, and the Audit Commission finds out, and it wonders why it wasn't declared at the first tier. Now, for the standing order, according to the standing order, at the first tier of declaration for other matters, now the member should include items where he thinks a declaration is appropriate, but he can also make a declaration at the second tier. Now, this has been pointed out by the Audit Commission. Audit has also pointed out that if during the first tier of declaration some members made declarations but others didn't, then should it be specified more specifically which interest should be declared. So we agree with the Audit Commission, and we have formulated certain principles for the DCs to follow. Now, so they can follow or not as they wish, right? Now, so proposals are made to the DCs. Now, the standing orders are actually made by the district councils. Now, at the recommendation of the Audit Commission, we make the proposals to the DCs in the hope that they would follow our proposals. And several DCs have endorsed our new proposals, and I believe other DCs will follow. Now, some members may have to leave first, so I will try to abbreviate for my first 10 minutes, and I hope the Secretary will answer briefly. Now, right now, there are 2 tiers of declaration. The first tier covers pecuniary interests, and if it's found that there are further interests, then I would declare again. So they are complementary, the 2 tiers. Now, at the second tier, there should be a check on whether the declaration was made at the first tier. Now, so the issue is Was the first tier of declaration done properly? Important interests, were they included? And other interests, other declarable interests that hasn't been specified. So you should have a simple system. Now, for instance, if you accepted remuneration, then you should include that. Now, will you try to evolve for the better, or will you adopt the present basis? Now, I've only 10 minutes. I'll let the Secretary answer first. That would be more clear. As I said earlier, we make adjustments and we make new proposals to the DCs, and some DCs have adopted our proposals. Can you provide us with a document? What are your proposals? Which DCs have adopted them? Which haven't? And will they adopt them in future? And if not, why not? Yes, we can. Now, do you specify what are the other declarable interests? Now we want to see whether your document is correct. Now, of course, later we will submit that for members' perusal, but we will provide specific examples. So, in all cases where applications have been made for funds and it applies to chairman, honorary chairman, and so on. So we have our examples cover all these cases, and so it also covers consultants and clients. Now, a DC member often has 60 or 70 titles, so you have to try to cover all of them. Now, let's come to cases 1 and 2. Now, the society, the community, would think that sometimes declaration was not made at the first tier, or in the second tier, or they declared but still participated in voting. Now, the figures show that the members declared the positions they took up, and but after the declaration, the chairman made a ruling that they are to leave, or they are not going to participate. So, apart from these two cases, did they speak? Did they participate in voting? Because I've often been told that, say, Jockey Club applies for funding, then the members are asked for their opinions. No opinion, then it's passed. So did they participate in the voting? Now, in cases 1 and 2, when a declaration has been made, would have an effect on the funding?
Well, according to my understanding, basically when they discuss it, then they would need to declare interest, but the chairman would not make a ruling. So there was such a case. In future, we do have to make remedies that we request the Secretariat to remind the chairman to make a ruling and that it should adhere to the three-tier declaration of interest. Some members may carry directorships, and so they would need to report their interest. There would be guidelines, and so if they belong to one of the implementation parties, the member is a chairman but does not participate in the activity arrangement, then he can be present but cannot make any comments. That is the second tier. And there is another tier in which there are many members, maybe honorary directors, and the chairman will be able to make a ruling that these members would be allowed to stay. So these are the three tiers of a declaration of interest that have been considered good practices at the DCs, and we hope that all DCs would carry these out. Mr. Ho, well, I think you've answered only half my question. So I see that the HAD plays a very important role in the DCs. As I said, councillors are not professionals and they rely heavily on the reminders given by the Secretariat. Therefore, I want to understand, Mr. Ho. Oh yes, legislators also bear the responsibility on what to do. Well, yes, the legislators also carry a responsibility. That's why I'm asking whether the Secretariat has reminded the legislators. Well, if the Secretariat has reminded the chairman, yet the legislators do not abide, then, the responsibility lies with the legislators. So I want to ask, have you ever conducted any briefing on declaration of interest before the formal meetings or before any new term of district councils? Oh yes, when there is a new term, then we would explain to the councillors on how to declare interest and how to fill out their forms. Well, it seems that it's not been very successful. Well, so 1 to 7 is not any problem enough, but it's for the other interests. We have drawn out explanations and examples as to what is other declarable interest. For example, honorary members or honorary directors, etc. Mr. Ho asked about what we are to do in the future. We have already communicated with the 18 district councils that they should remind members every time, and that the chairman must make a ruling, and that it must also be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. Mr. Lam. Mr. Shiu, we are now in part 3. Well, it's not your turn yet. I'm just telling you that, we are now in part 3 and you can prepare your questions. Mr. Lam, please. Thank you. I'd like to follow up with 3.1.3 because I know some members of the public may be watching television right now. So 3.1.3, it said that out of the 59% of the district councils did not make any rulings, and that the interests have not been recorded. And these circumstances, those who are declared interest continue their attendance in the meetings. So we'll talk about the 73 of the cases. Out of the 129 cases of declaration of interest, we have these numbers. Are these meetings recorded? Yes, all of them were recorded. So can we now go through all the recordings to see, one, whether the chairman has made any ruling? Well, we have gone through the recordings for case 1 and 2, and the chairman has not made any ruling. So from the recordings, did the secretary remind the chairman to make any rulings? Well, we didn't hear, or well, we did not hear on the recordings. We're not sure whether they whispered it to the chairman or not. So have you asked the secretary for those councils whether they have reminded the chairman to make such a ruling? Well, we know some of the members during the meeting that some reminders have been made. What did you say? I didn't hear you clearly. We did ask the secretariat of the 18 DCs, and we know that some of the DC secretariats did remind the chairman to make a ruling. But for these cases, no. Well, for cases 1 and 2, there is no evidence pointing to whether the secretariat has reminded the chairman or not. Well, I'm not asking all 18 DCs, I'm just talking about the 3 DCs that are mentioned in the audit report. So you can just give me the answers on these 3 DCs. I'll reiterate. Did the secretaries remind the chairman to make a ruling? Oh, Director, we have to go back and look at whether it is stated in the chairman's brief that the chairman has to make a ruling after listening to the declarations of interest. The secretary plays a very important role to assist the chairman and the members to make sure that everyone abides by all the rules and standing orders. Why is all this information not prepared? Because this is the crux of the question and the discussion. We do have ample time for you to prepare all the questions, yet why didn't you prepare us with the information? Is it because the chairman did not make a ruling that it was not shown on the minutes? If the secretary has indicated to the chairman to make a ruling, yet the chairman did not do so, then as the secretary of the meeting, then it should be listed into the minutes of the meetings that the secretary has reminded the chairman to make a ruling, yet no ruling has been made. Director. There were no rulings made in the 2 cases, and therefore it was not indicated on the minutes of the meeting as well. Well, as there is no information whatsoever that the secretary reminded the chairman, so I assume that no reminder has been made, then this means that the secretary did not carry out his responsibility properly. Well, if the secretary did remind the chairman, yet the chairman did not do so, then it's a different matter. So, were any reports made to the HAD about that? Well, do you have such guidelines made to the secretary? Well, I mean, it depends on how you answer the question, but you have to be careful in your answer. So are all the secretary's responsibilities put down very carefully in the guidelines? We have to be fair to the secretaries. We just can't say that just because you haven't told them to do so, that they have not done their jobs properly. We want to understand your current mechanism. Thank you, Chairman. Well, yes, according to the standing orders, the chairman needs to make a ruling. As a secretary, has the secretary reminded the chairman at an appropriate time what to do? I don't think there is a regulation on what should be reminded, but a good secretary should remind the chairman of what to do. Well, I have a very good secretary, but it's not his or her responsibility to tell me what to do. Well, you have to be fair to the secretaries. Well, a secretary will need to mark the attendance of the meetings. That is something that must be done. So, well, this is a very good question. Or we cannot go backwards. So, we have now drawn out guidelines to remind secretaries to also remind the chairman. Well, yes, understood. Okay, now I'd like to follow up with para 3.18. If you would allow me to quote some parts of it. Of the 9 DCs examined, there were 3 working groups under 3 DCs that endorsed applications for CI projects on behalf of DCs or committees. The audit examined their 2016 minutes of meetings and found that of the 3 working groups, in 1 working group, the minutes of meetings disclosed only the final decisions of project applications. Other information such as members in attendance, interest declared, and rulings on interest declared had not been disclosed. Well, so you said that the recordings of the 2 cases, does this include A? Director? Please speak in front of the microphone. I think we'll have to go back and check it out. I'm not sure whether this responds to cases 1 and 2. All right, please continue with the questions. All right, if that's the case, tell me, who makes the decision that the minutes of meetings not disclose interest declared and rulings on interest declared? Why would members in attendance not be listed in the minutes of meetings? That's very strange. Why would you allow this to happen? Oh, okay, all right, okay, let's go. We have a meeting today at a certain hour. There is a ruling, but we don't know who attended. We don't know how many people attended. We don't know about any declarations of interest. So how could you allow? Well, it's very hard, to compare ourselves with others, because, we follow our, we abide by the rules very properly here. So can you go back and check it out? Director, please go check with the secretary. So who made the decision not to put down such important information? The chairman, the members, or the secretary? And why is the information not recorded? Because, minutes of meetings, usually would include all such information? Is there some sort of information that is not privy to other people? Well, we have to see whether this is a regular practice. Because we're talking about discussion of approval of public funds. You need to be held accountable. You have to let people know your selection criteria, whether there are any conflicts of interest. If nobody knows anything about it, then how could the media or the public monitor it? If you don't even have a recording, then it's really your word against mine. Who would remember who attended? This is not professional and very irresponsible. I don't believe, this should be allowed at the DCs. All right, we would ask the director to go back and check the information. Same goes with B. I will read it out quickly. In the other two working groups, the minutes of meetings disclosed more information, including interest declared. However, the minutes of meetings did not indicate that rulings had been made on the interest declared. The members concerned continued to participate in the meetings. All right, so this is the same. Why did such important information disappear? Why is it such a case? And these members continue to participate in the meetings. Do they have conflicts of interest? Did they join in the voting? Now, really, you do have to deal with all these issues. You're correct. Well, I'll not go to part 4 yet. I'll let Mr. Ho to... Oh, no, it's Mr. Xiu's turn. Mr. Xiu, you can now ask your questions in relation to part 3. You'd like to share with us your 10 years experience at the DC. All right, for part 3... 3.16. So this is the mainly some working groups that they do not have any specific guidelines at the working group level. Let me first express my view. Usually, we would not talk it at the board meetings on the fund approval. We would usually discuss it at the working group level and then bring it to the board. Usually the details have already been all lined out, and members would just listen to the main summary. So usually we would vote for a vote of confidence for the working group. Most of the discussion, most of the approving is done at the working group level. When you're at the district council level, then we only look at the big picture. We don't look at all these details. So the declaration of interest should be done at the working group level. So you really should have some guidelines for the working groups. Secretary, well, yes, Mr. Xiu is correct. The declaration of interest mechanism is only for use at the district council level. And I do agree that it is not very ideal at the working group level. So now we have already sent out all the mechanisms that these should all be carried out at all the working group levels as well.
You can see in 3.16b that the minutes of the working group will only record the final decisions. And under 3.16a, it's not a decision of the district council that they are made. the matter has to refer to the DC for endorsement. But as Mr. Siu has said, very often when the matter is brought to attention of the DC, they only know about the reasons only know about the decisions, but not anything about the declaration of interest. So more should be done in this regard to guide the councils. Under point 9.1 of the guidelines on the utilization of DC funds, we request all the members and co-opted members of working groups to declare interest. These are either district councillors or co-opted members. So under the guideline of fund allocation, they have to declare the interest. But for the standing orders, we do not provide anything for working groups. We are going to add some rules for working groups to clarify things. Mr. Siu, 3.5, 3.6, there's a case noted by the audit. There's a 33 members, 16 out of 33 make declarations in the second tier, but not in the first tier. Why? Well, why? What did that happen? I can perhaps provide some information about the case. Or maybe I can share with you the practice in my district council. When I was elected, before the meetings, before the start of the year, the secretariat staff would ask us to declare our interests, remunerated directorship, and so on and so forth. It's all about money. For the second tier declaration, we're talking about membership of Kaifong Association, Arts and Culture Association. If you are associated, you have to declare your interest. When we make the first year declaration, we are not asked to declare anything about membership or directorship of these associations. But we know that they are bona fide organizations. They are there to help the community. So we participate on that basis. In the first tier declaration, obviously it's unrelated. It's not about money. There's no pecuniary interest. But in recent years, people we have stricter rules. We do not participate in the working group, and so we don't know the sums, the applications, the vetting. But at the end of the day, the district council will have to endorse the recommendations of the working group. Sometimes the names of the applicants are not listed out, and sometimes we have to make a declaration after other people have reminded us that that a certain organization is involved. I think I'm a district councillor, so I should be one of those who have been found to be wanting here to assure people to make sure that we have no doubts. You should ask all district councillors to declare any association and relationship with NGOs and voluntary agencies in the first tier. Whether it's going to last, it's going to go on, and you have to use a lot of paper to list out the organizations. I don't know whether you would like to do this, but it would be a lot of trouble. Secretary, in reality, it was not really just about case 1, but what really happens in the district councils, in the form we use for declaration. We also want the district councillors to declare other declarable interests. Some do not provide a lot of information. Some would provide a long list of interests. In the view of the audit recommendation, we would like to do something about first-tier declarations. We'll give some examples. For example, if you are the chairman or consultant or advisor to a certain community organization, you should declare your interests. Would that be very troublesome? Well, actually, after the district councillor is elected, he or she would have to make the declaration. But of course, sometimes you are not going to be very exhaustive in providing the information on interest, and you only discover that you need to make a certain declaration in the tier 2 declaration. Mr. Lam Chia-ting asked questions about whether the Secretariat had provided any reminder or advice to the chairman in that case. Well, I would say that Secretariat staff are very good. But in a district council meeting, not everyone will be present from the very start. Some will only join in the middle of the meeting. So maybe when a district councillor comes in, it may be on item 2 or item 3. And I don't think it's fair to ask the secretariat staff to give reminder every time. It's for the district councillor to understand the rules. And sometimes the member would be just reminded by other colleagues, other district councillors on the matter being discussed, and they may not know that there is a need to declare anything. And I don't think it's the duty of the DC Secretariat staff to give reminders. But if they are willing, particularly if we have an item on funding, and if someone is late to a meeting, it would be good if a reminder can be given. But don't send the Secretariat staff to prison for failing to do so. Yes, we have asked them to take another look at this. Other questions? Not for the time being. Mr. Ho. Thank you, Chairman. I very much agree with Mr. Siu Ka-fai. In answering my first question, I already said that the declaration system is too complicated. You yourself reminded us 4 times on declaration of interest today. In small working group meetings in the district councils, they may not be able to comply with such requirements. I think we should be given the information in the first meeting, and there should be examples, just like this case. And I believe all members will strictly adhere to such rules in the future. Case 2. Point 5. A large proportion, 57% of cases, in those cases, ruling on interest declared by a member had not been made or recorded in the minutes of the meeting, and it was unsatisfactory. So in some cases there were rulings, but for these cases, 57% of the total, whether they are from certain district councils, whether they have different practices, and what have they done in the past months to address this issue. I think if the Secretariat can remind the chairman to make a ruling on declaration of interest by other councillors, it would be the ideal situation. Because if that's done, the minutes or records will show that the ruling has been made. We have sent a letter to Secretariat staff. Please give us a copy. We reminded them that they should advise the chairman to make rulings. In 57% of the cases, the decision was made without any ruling by the chairman. So please look into this. We've tried to look into whether the 57% of those cases were cases whereby no advice was given by the Secretariat staff. I cannot say for sure that for these cases where there was no ruling on the declaration of interest, the Secretariat staff did not give any advice to the chairman. Second question, 3.20, it's been noted that in certain working groups, they were delegated authority by the DCs to endorse projects not exceeding certain sums of funding, and it's found that some working groups were not delegated with such power, which would be against the standing orders of the or the district council's ordinance. No need to dwell in the past, but what about the future? So this problem has been highlighted. What can you do about this? We hope that working groups will be treated like committees, where you have accepted the audit recommendations. We take it that you are going to do it. When are you going to implement this? We have already done it. Please give us a written confirmation. So can we say that there will be no lack of delegation for working groups in the future? We are saying that the working group's decision must be endorsed by the committee and the district council. It's under 3.16 A and B. Mr. Paul Chair, or the public may not know what working groups we are talking about. Please explain the nature of such working groups and what is the membership. How are they composed? Working groups are set up for different purposes. Some are called a working group, but this is a standing arrangement for certain business. Some working groups are set up for specific purposes. In the working groups, there may be district councillors or co-opted members. Co-opted members may not be district councillors. According to the funding guidelines, both district councillors and co-opted members in the working group must declare their interests. Under paragraph 3.16 bracket A, in principle, the decision made by a working group shall only be final after it's endorsed by the DC or the committee concerned. So my question is, are these ad hoc, small working groups? And the formal committees are only those formed by the DC. According to our standing orders, a district council may set up any working groups it like to help the DC in carrying out specific functions. But under the standing orders, the sub-working groups are not required to make the declaration of interest. And funding application, or decisions on funding application by a working group shall not be regarded as the decision of DC until and unless it is endorsed by the DC or the committee concerned. This is under the standing orders. The working group is there to help the DC to carry out specified functions. It can be for a particular purpose with a few members, or it can have a large number of members. This time, we are going to revise the standing orders in the light of the audit report, so that the declaration of interest system would cover working groups. Paul, to put it bluntly, because you think there is a final gatekeeper, because in the final decision made by or endorsement made by the DC, you adopt a very relaxed or too relaxed a system for declaration interest by working group members. I would say that we did not devise a declaration of interest system for working groups, because working groups are set out for a variety of purposes, not just for funding application. It can be a working group for a logo. In the past, working groups were rather informal, so they were not covered by the formal declaration of interest system. And now we know that in some DCs, as Mr. Seals has said, they rely a lot on the advice or recommendations made by the standing orders, and they tend to place a lot of trust on the working groups. Although the members may have to declare their interest, we think that the operation, the work of the working group should be put under a more formalized system. So the flexibility with working groups, the informal nature, and the involvement of more outsiders, you should not stress too much about the formal procedure. Instead, you should ask the DC to be more careful about the final decision or endorsement. This problem arose because in the past the district councils relied too much on the recommendations of the working groups. If you make it too formal and there are strict rules, no one will be willing to serve on those working groups. You may have a very valid argument, but in the past, because the final endorsement was not done in strict adherence to the rules, you have this problem. We'll talk to the 18 district councils and remind them of this argument. According to the current rules, the working group cannot make the final decision. So when the committee or the DC accepts the recommendation, it should comply with the relevant procedure and scrutinize the decision. Well, 3.16a and 3.16b talks about why this is the case, but please don't turn this from something good into something bad. Secretary, we have to be careful. We have the DC, we have the committees and working groups. There are two types of working group, one for organizing activities.
maybe they get some public members of the public to participate. And the other type discusses funding. Now, given the audit's report, I believe you must be very stringent and careful in working groups because they have a lengthy discussion process and they do vote in detail on the amounts. So I believe this practice should also apply to working groups. I think because they do approve funding. Now, you shouldn't be too strict towards working groups just because audit made this recommendation. You should also make sure that the real decision-making council is adhering strictly to the rules. Now, 3.8b, it mentions that one DC in the circulation of documents would attach a return slip now. So to make sure that one who has declared interest would not speak. Now, looking at case 2, there was a meeting where there were out of 33 members, 16 declared interest. 2 were chairman, a vice chairman. Now, this is for so half of the 33 had a part. So every DC is different. Now, this is case 1. Now, 3.8b1, b2. Now, if you declared interest, you can't speak, then out of the 33, half would have left, and maybe you don't have a quorum. Then how do you deal with that? Because every DC follows different rules. It can get quite mixed up. Now, in case 1, on page 33, now, out of 33 members, 16 made declarations of interest. They belong to that NGO. Now, for the public, this appears very strange. Now, half of the group, half of those in the meeting would approve money for themselves. Now, these are presidents, honorary president, now executive committee members. Now, these probably the presidents and honorary president, they might have donated money, but it doesn't look good to the public. So apart from making declaration of interest, perhaps there should be a little more information provided. Now, you should make clear that the directors are not paid. The presidents might actually have to donate money. Now, these members actually are working for society. So it's not the use of public money to line their own pockets, or at least the pockets of the NGOs that they serve. So this might look quite outrageous. Out of 33 members, 16 are actually people who run the NGO. Why do we have this hearing? We want the public to understand more. So at first we didn't think of holding this meeting, but having looked at the previous correspondence, I can tell you that we want to make sure that every dime of public funds is in accordance with correct procedures. This is also for the protection of the DC and of public figures. We just want to remind the DC members that they have this obligation. This obligation does not rest only with the Secretariat. When funding is to be approved, there must be declaration of interest, as Mr. Chair said. The declaration must be open. It's not that the 33 members cannot join in the decision making. It's just like in LegCo, we have a strict mechanism for declaration of interest. The chairman will make a ruling on who can vote, who can be present. There are strict procedures to be followed. So this way we hope to help the community and to help those who serve the community so that they won't be subject to wrong accusations. Mr. Ho? Now, the district officers, now sometimes the organizations are quite clear in which camps they belong to. So they are suspicious of each other. Now, actually, some of these NGOs are trying to serve the public. Now, perhaps you can invite someone from the other camp, one or two members of the other camp, to join that NGO, so there is greater transparency and there is less quarrel. The Secretary. It's not compulsory. Now, I'm not going to answer on this point. I was going to answer about the formulation of a good mechanism. You must have clear guidelines, and you must let the public believe that it's fair, and the mechanism must also be open and transparent to the public. So we have now made the clear guidelines. It's a 3-tier system. Now, some can stay but not vote. Some have to leave the meeting. So it's very clear, and fairness is when members, having declared their interests, will be subject to a ruling by the chairperson. Now, we discussed just now that the chairman has the obligation to run the meeting with or without advice from the Secretariat. He has to make a ruling on who can stay, etc. Finally, whether the funding is approved or the discussion would be put on the website so that the public can participate and there is broad acceptance. It's now 5 p.m. Do you want a break, Mr. Ho? If not, we can move on to part 4. 10 minutes. Okay, we leave 10 minutes late then. We have a 10-minute break now.